All right, looks like we are alive, and I want to welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny B, and I am your host and moderator for tonight's, or I should say this afternoon's, exciting debate on the Genesis flood. Debates on the Genesis flood are always exciting, and I'm looking forward to this. I know the audience is as well. It's a privilege to have Professor David McQueen and Ken Rock. Professor McQueen being our team geologist and flood researcher, and Ken, you being a frequent debater here on Standing for Truth. Tonight's topic, again, Noah's flood. So, gentlemen, I do appreciate your time for this important debate. Before we get into the opening statements, as I like to do, let's kind of break the ice, get to know you gentlemen a little bit. And Ken, it's been a little while since you've been here on the channel. So why don't we start with you? A little bit about yourself for anybody who's not familiar with you. And of course, if you have a channel or anything like that, feel free to cover that as well. Ken, thanks for being here.
Okay. Yeah, as Donnie says, I've been here multiple times. My name is Kenneth Jonathan Rock. You can find me on YouTube as Ken Rock. My YouTube channel mostly covers character analysis, first debates, and stuff like that. I actually just got done recently power scaling all of Undertale, and soon I plan to go into stuff like Omega Flyway versus all of DC. So if you're into that sort of stuff, go check me out. I also have a Discord for anyone who has any questions on that stuff or has questions that weren't able to be asked here. Go check that out. You can find it on the links to, on my YouTube channel, like you can Donnie's links here. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot to say. I'm a basic gamer. I like to have fun with these debates, and I'm looking forward to debating David. He's actually one of my favorite people on this channel to watch. So,
Okay, appreciate that, Ken. Professor McQueen, you are definitely a fan favorite, even when it comes to the evolutionist side. And Ken, you mentioned DC, that is DC Comics, and Professor McQueen is actually our team Batman. So this works out perfectly for you. Professor McQueen, over to you. A little bit about yourself and how are you today?
Ken, I've really been looking forward to this. I want you to know from the very start how appreciative I am that you have stepped in some awkward situations over the last 2 weeks. And I'm so glad that you have agreed to debate me tonight. I think from my watching your debates over the last few months, I know that you have an interest in the fossil record, and I can already predict that we're going to run out of time tonight to talk about every aspect of the fossils and the contrast between Marvel and DC comic books, since I've been collecting for about 60 years. Good to talk to you, Ken, and looking forward to tonight.
Okay, Professor McQueen and Ken, thank you so much for those introductions. And for the audience's sake, the question we are debating tonight is what best explains the geology of the Earth, with the bigger picture topic basically being the Genesis flood. So I do want to cover the format for this afternoon. We are going to be starting with 12-minute opening statements. Professor McQueen being in the affirmative when it comes to the Genesis flood, that it did happen, and Ken being basically anti-Genesis flood, so we'll have him go second. Then we're going to have an 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. After the rebuttals, we're going to have a short 5-minute break where the debaters can refill their coffee and kind of get ready for the discussion, everybody's favorite part of a debate. The discussion will be about 30 minutes. Then we'll have 5-minute concluding statements. And this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We'll have a roughly 25-minute audience Q&A for a debate of about 2 hours. So with that being said, Professor David McQueen, we are going to hand it over to you. The floor is yours. Whenever you're ready, 12 minutes.
Thank you very much. I've got my Louisiana pocket watch here all set up and ready to mark off the 12 minutes. In an attempt, Ken, to move into the 21st century, Donnie, go ahead and start my PowerPoint presentation for me. And I'll use that as my beginning. I want to give thanks to George Bond, who has helped me with this, and this will be a presentation that he has helped me modify and refine. I want to talk about the Grand Canyon and the Genesis flood as the first debate point against Mr. Rock, my newfound friend Ken. Next. The image on the right is a evaluation of the book of Genesis, and especially the Great Flood of Genesis 6, 7, and 8, provided by George. And it's been very interesting for me to look at that in some detail. And if you look at the points there, you'll see that you have mentioned 5 months of the flood waters rising. Now, on the left is what I have been using as a model for many years. And you'll notice that in my discussion about things, many of you have heard me talk about 6 months of the waters rising and 6 months of the waters decreasing. But the research that George has pointed out is I'm a month off. Should be 5 months of the waters rising. Next. Why am I interested in debating a young man like Ken? Well, his family and my family, Donnie's family, and all of your families are important to us. This is not our entire family. This is a trip to the beach with 75% of the family there. And so my motive, my focus is the next generation. Next. Here's a Grand Canyon hike that I was on. And you'll notice in the far distance the white band of sandstone called the Coconino sandstone. I hiked the canyon 5 times from 1984 to 1987. Put another way, I was down in the canyon hiking from the rim down to the river, mostly in the spring, but one time in the summer where the reflected heat was over 100 degrees, reflecting off the outcrop there that you see on the left. Next. So my summary of the first point is that the rocks that you see in the Grand Canyon, like the Coconino sandstone, are found worldwide. Now, one area of emphasis that we have and have had in discussions that George Bond and I have had with Standing for Truth audience over the years is that the Coconino sandstone is found all over the American Southwest. Well, let's keep going. Next. Dr. Tim Clary at ICR has written a book that, Ken, I hope you've got on your shelf, in which he talks about not Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, but rather he talks about the different sequences. Now, this is an internet slide supposedly showing a fossil-bearing limestone. It's not a very good slide, so let's go to the next one. Trilobites appear abruptly and fully formed in the fossil record. If you could make me full screen now, Donnie, I'll show a trilobite to the group. here we go. Here is a trilobite that I have purchased in the past. Pretty good sized trilobite there. And then here is a trilobite actually in the rock matrix. I hope you can see it. It's the black there. Let me see how close I can get it to the camera, and maybe you can see it a lot better. You see the trilobite there. Okay, Donnie, go back to my PowerPoint, please. What I want to talk about is Dr. Dwayne Gish's standard argument that these trilobites appear abruptly and fully formed. So my challenge to Ken tonight is I have hiked the canyon. I've actually never seen a trilobite down in the Canberra Ordovician area. I talked to Gary Parker about this, one of my colleagues, and he said, McQueen, you didn't know what you were looking at because they weren't so pretty and nice like what you've bought in the past, like this one. They're broken bits. So they're there. You just didn't see them. But they do appear abruptly and fully formed. So my challenge to Ken is to explain to me how you can go from primordial soup like this. Here's some Campbell's primordial soup up to trilobites in the Cambrian. Next. Dr. Tim Clary has introduced us to a vocabulary that's called sequence stratigraphy. And instead of talking about Canberra Ordovician, he talks about the Salk sequence going up into the Tippecanoe sequence. And then as you move up the rock record, you come to these famous White Cliffs of Dover, chalk. And I would suggest to Ken that the fact that you can find limestones like this worldwide, there's a chalk in there's a chalk in Texas called the Austin chalk. A chalk like this can be found in the White Cliffs of Dover. Derek Auger has reported looking at the same chalk cliffs in northern Turkey. Next. The three of us should take our wives to the Bahamas. The Bahamas are, you can see they're off the east coast of Florida, so they're probably not going to be hit today by the hurricane. But if we could get down there and go to South Andros Island that you see, the three of us could walk out on a limestone that is called micrite, which is a very fine grained limestone. And that micrite mud has formed quickly. In my viewpoint of the 4,000-year young Earth, the 6,000-year young Earth, this micrite mud is formed in the Bahamas in the years after the Great Flood. Next. So many evolutionists argue that limestone is a huge problem among the young Earth creation community, but it's not at all. And later on, as we have discussions, I'll point to some papers that George Bond has sent me that document this more. So just like the micrite mud, I'm arguing that limestones directly precipitated from the ocean during the time of the Great Flood. So here is some antacid, and I notice that it's calcium carbonate. So if I'm able to open this up, here I've got a calcium carbonate tablet. And so we put that in water and dissolve it. And if we have the right temperature and pH and so forth, it will precipitate directly from the water. Next. My next argument for Ken to rebut is the matter of metal mines. I'm old enough to have seen the Bingham copper mine before it had been filled with water because of a mistake made by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency years ago. But both in 69 and also in 1976, I saw this mine before it filled up. And why would a metal mine like this be important as an argument for the worldwide flood? Next. In the mine there is found copper, lead, zinc, iron, gold, silver. And so the worldwide flood is the best explanation for the origin of the world's metals, that is, ore deposits. Why would I say that? The chemistry of the Great Flood varied as the months went on. And it varied in a sense that tremendous amount of fresh water apparently formed very early in the flood. And then as the fountains of the Great Deep broke up, you had the introduction of what a geologist calls hydrothermal brines, hot, salty water. That leached out of the sediment these metals like copper, lead, zinc, gold, and silver. Here is a piece of native copper from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which we'll return to later on. Next. Here's Dr. Gish, and he really did ride a mule down into the Grand Canyon. Dr. Gish was one of my mentors when I was at the Institute for Creation Research from 1983 to 1987. Next. Here is Gish's argument about trilobites. They appear abruptly and fully formed, and I want Mr. Rock to explain to me how that can be true. Next. Next. Notice that white layer. That is the Coconino sandstone. And in that sandstone, which was formed underwater, not Aeolian, the way the evolutionary textbooks taught me when I was at Tennessee and at Michigan, this waterborne sand has a unique appearance. Ken, notice the knife edge contact between the red rocks below and the upper part of the Grand Canyon. If this is supposed to be a migrating beach over not just a few thousand years, but millions of years, how come it's got sharp edge contacts? Why would it not have undulating, let's go to the beach kind of contacts? Next. So in the Grand Canyon, you have both clastics and carbonates, which I think can both be explained, not only there, but worldwide, in a young Earth creationist viewpoint. Next. The erosion of the Grand Canyon is best explained by an enormous lake forming after the flood that you can see basically in the green there. And then a earthen dam broke, tremendous amount of water spilled over into the canyon, eroding it. And so you have the formation of the canyon in the first 5 months and the erosion of the canyon essentially beginning in Genesis 8 and verse 1 and going down through the end of the time that the ark was floating. Next. Here's a model from Europe of the ark. Donnie, am I at my last minute here? Donnie, am I at my last minute?
Yes, let me see. I just had myself on mute, so I didn't give you any background noise. Yeah, you would have. Well, actually, we're a little bit over time, so maybe if you want
Okay,
to
good.
take
I'll
1
stop
minute.
there.
Okay.
Out of respect for my opponent, and we will continue the debate. Thank you, Donnie.
Okay, thank you very much for that opening presentation, Professor David McQueen. Appreciate the visuals and, of course, the time, effort, and work put into that. So what we'll do, to be fair, is we will give Ken up to equal time, and whatever time is not used, as we typically do, we'll just throw into either the audience question period or the discussion. So Ken, whenever you're ready, just make sure to unmute, and it is now your time for opening arguments.
Ken, I'm going to turn around and take notes on what you say.
Good. Yeah, I actually was taking notes myself as well. So if you got confused by what I was doing, that's practically what it is. Be ready for. It's about argumentations at another time. But so the two the points that you brought up were good ones. It'll be fun to talk about those. But the two that realistically I wanted to look at today were going to be one, the consequences of what a worldwide flood would cause as far as how it would affect the world. So if we were to look at something like a worldwide flood, it would cause the oceans themselves to kind of mix. This is a big problem because we have deposits of fresh water, like you said early on, and big bodies of salt water. This is bad because it would actually dilate the salt water so that the animals that are living in there wouldn't be able to survive as well as they would be able to beforehand. And it would cause the freshwater to actually guarantee death because their bodies would be having the water pulled out of their body, because as anyone knows, generally water wants to go to an area with less water. That's why it's not good for you to drink salt water when you're on the ocean, obviously, because it just pulls the water out of you instead of rehydrates you. Another big problem with this is water actually has this weird property where the weight of it actually doesn't increase just in one direction. It actually amplifies by a good amount. So, a good example, and this is a bit anecdotal, but I used to have a fish tank. I could lift it about halfway with it only half full, but me and my friend couldn't lift it if it were full. That would mean the force in order to lift a 2 times heavier, theoretical 2 times heavier fish tank is actually that greater than 4 times the amount of it. When those numbers are amplified, such as 100 times, 1,000 times, 100,000 times, animals that are living underneath it wouldn't be able to handle the pressure and they would die. And that's just looking at the animals that could theoretically get to higher grounds so they can survive. Stuff like plants and all that would absolutely be crushed under the weight of this increased pressure. Another thing that I think we should go over, like you said earlier, the fossil record here. When you look at the fossil record, you see the creatures and all that, and there's similar to, as you were pointing out, the way that the earth and all that goes with limestone and all that. This is important because most animals would go to higher grounds, and you would expect the more powerful ones to be able to get to high grounds, but we see stuff like the T-Rex, mammoths and all that actually lower than what you would expect if that were to be true. And it's not a problem of density either, because things like T-Rex and velociraptors are on similar grounds of the fossil record, and a T-Rex and a velociraptor aren't the same density as each other. Density would be a matter of not how heavy something is, but a matter of how much water it displaces at a time. Yeah, sorry, those were the only 2 points I were able to prepare for now. Yeah, that's the end of my setup. Donnie.
Oh, Ken, that was quick. Barely enough time for me to get my coffee refilled. So
I can try and squeeze out a third one for you real fast if you want.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you've got up to 15 minutes. So why don't you throw in a third one and take your time. Take your time. You know, you don't got to treat this as a speed round. These are opening arguments. And this gives David the opportunity to rest and prepare his rebuttal. So go ahead, Ken. Take your time.
In my defense, the debates I'm usually with the anime and all that, usually they try and get it as fast as possible. So yeah, sorry about that. I'm used to a much faster format. A third topic we could go over theoretically is there's a lot of stuff that exists that are theoretically shouldn't be able to survive within a world that created that we're in a post-flood. Realistically, I would have grown over that point. So another thing I saw you brought up would be the idea that there within 15 years, what type of flood would be able to cover the planet for 15 years. My another thing that could replace that would be the idea of a bunch of small local floods. So we'd have to go over which one's more likely between one really big long flood versus a bunch of small local floods. And I think it'd be more reasonable to say there are small local floods, because this would deal with the first problem that I brought up as well. Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
Donnie. I don't have any more.
No, that's fine. I just want the debaters, as always, here to feel like they're getting fairly treated and having all of the necessary time to lay out their arguments. So there's some time we can put into the audience Q&A. Professor David McQueen, let me unmute you, brother. And whenever you're ready,
Okay.
you've got up to a 10-minute rebuttal. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and note the time on my clock and try to be more prompt. Let's notice behind me here some of the points that my opponent has brought up, and let's do a rebuttal on them one at a time. He correctly notes that you have a mixture of fresh water and salt water during the time of the flood. Presumably, the waters that would have been part of the ecosystem of the one world continent would be fresh. As the fountains of the great deep erupted, and as the rain, as it talks in scripture, began to fall, that would have mixed salt water with fresh water. He correctly points out that we have a situation where freshwater fish would be killed by the freshwater fish. If I can get this working right, like right here, freshwater fish would have been killed by this event. And I would give a rebuttal to that that's exactly what we do see. If you go to the Green River Formation out in the western United States, it turns out that in the Green River Formation, there are thousands of fossil fish. One of my geology colleagues, Steve Archibald, years ago, gave me a sample of this as a gift, and it's a remarkable preservation. And so that particular group of freshwater fish, when they hit that zone of inappropriate salinity, they died by the thousands and tens of thousands. Okay, so that's my rebuttal of this whole freshwater thing. Let's go to the issue. And actually, Ken, of all the people I've debated over the last year with Standing for Truth, you're the first to bring up the idea that the very weight of the floodwaters as they rose would kill creatures just from the very weight of it. Well, that's a very interesting point, and let's talk about that for a minute in rebuttal. George Bond and I have spent the last year trying to put together the parameters for the worldwide flood. What would have been the temperature of the floodwaters 1 month, 2 months, 3 months into it? What would the temperature have been as they receded? Because remember, the biblical picture is that the floodwaters rose, carried the the ark up and then let it down in eastern Turkey at the end of the flood. Ms. McQueen and I just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary over the weekend, and we also are both 70 years old. So we've had time in our life to teach children in Sunday school, and we have taught them that when they think about the flood, everybody had a birthday on the ark. All of the dinosaurs had birthdays, the cattle, and so forth. And so as we think about the flood and the weight of it, you've introduced me to a parameter that I'm going to think about before you and I debate again in December or January. I guess my initial reaction to your critique is that, or to your comment, is that as the sand and silt and clay was being washed off the continent and the limestone was precipitating in the continent, the weight of that water could be a function of the worldwide catastrophe. Maybe that's why there are so many diatoms in the White Cliffs of Dover, just from the weight of the water. I'll have to ponder that, but I'm going to put a check mark by that. That's something that needs to be looked into. Now, I've been complimentary of you, Ken, but now I must become a bit more tough. Your idea of a number of local floods being able to explain what we're seeing is all well and good if you look at one part of the geologic record. Here is one of my favorite maps. This is the map of the United States, the geology of the United States. And just so you can get yourself oriented, the C here is Chicago. Down here, the N is Nashville, Tennessee. I live just an hour west of Jackson, Mississippi. And this yellow area here is called the Mississippi Embayment. If you go up to the Nashville area, which is here, and you look at the rocks that are blue, they are the coal measures of Tennessee. If you go to those coal measures, your local flood idea might explain one little piece. But when you actually go to the coal measures, and I'll use my ever-present University of Tennessee orange Play-Doh here as an example. If you go to these coal measures, which are black instead of orange, how do you explain polystrate fossils in that? Are you saying that the tree began to grow and then there was a local flood and then it kept standing for another 20 million years? Well, that's another 1,000 years, and then the layers built up? No, of course, this would have rotted away. So your local flood theory is used by some geologists in very specific areas, but it's not a good argument at all. So let's go back over and put an X by that as not a good argument from the old Earth evolutionary viewpoint. Now, let's go to this issue of how come T-Rex and Velociraptor are not always found together, or how come the dinosaurs are not found mixed in with human fossils and with marine fossils. Well, the issue of why we find so few human fossils in the record is something we can return to over the next hour. But the issue of T-Rex here, let me uncover it. The issue of T-Rex is a different matter and an important matter. T-Rex had the ability to escape the rising floodwaters. Remember that from a young Earth creationist viewpoint, when we look at what the Bible actually says as a book of Revelation about what went on, when we look at what the Bible says, the requirement is by the time that Noah landed in eastern Turkey, a year after the beginning of the flood, and he opened the door, the 8 people got out, and the animals, the dinosaurs, including T-Rex, got off the ark. By that time, every human had to be dead. And so the T-Rex being able to escape higher is what we call ecological zonation. The question that you didn't ask, but that you should have asked, is, okay, McQueen,
20 seconds.
If there were millions of people alive before the flood, where are all their bodies? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor McQueen. A lot of good points on both sides. Great debate so far. We're now moving into Ken Rock's rebuttal. Ken, take as much time as you need. As you know, whatever time is not used, I will just put into the audience Q&A or the discussion. So, Ken, go ahead. Take as much time as you need for the rebuttal, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things that and again, I appreciate you being as nice as you've been throughout this whole thing. The last few debates, obviously not on this channel, have been kind of aggressive, so I appreciate you not being as but one of the first things that I said was actually that not necessarily that the freshwater fish we would see dead freshwater fish, but we would actually see all fish die, because the saltwater fish need a certain amount of salt within the water to survive. If that's split, even if, let's say, 5% of the ocean is freshwater, I mean the salt water itself, the salt water would be dilated by 5%. This is bad because it would mean that the saltwater fish will be filled with so much water they would explode. And it would be the opposite for freshwater fish. They would actually have so much, it'd be in the salt water would actually pull the water from their body, causing them to shrink and die. And that's, again, would be also ignoring the pressure of the water itself. But I want to stick onto that for a little bit later. But that's any fish that would be able to survive, either being filled with so much water that exploded, or having all the water pulled out of it, would theoretically would have to survive eating those fish, because a lot of fish actually survive eating fish. This would cause a ripple effect within the oceanic food pyramid. Sorry, I don't know why that one took forever. Food pyramid that would cause a spiral effect that would kill anything that even theoretically could survive. It's would be similar, like if you were to take out like grass out of the mammals food table, you would see a decline within the prey animals. It would slowly affect all the way up to the top predator and all that. The weight itself is also an interesting thing as well. Like, even if we say all fish and all that were to survive the weight, again, this would destroy the plants at the very bottom as well, meaning we'd see no plant life at all. Corals, sea sponge, weird sea worms, depending on how you categorize them, I guess, since people categorize them as technically plants, but we'll get into that. So the fact that we see sea life in itself, not sea life, sea plants, also would theoretically go against the idea of a worldwide flood. Sorry, 1 second. Forgot to start my timer as well, so I can try to force myself to get these times in. And I'm sorry, if this comes off as mean, I don't mean it to be. I actually had said that we generally see stuff like velociraptors and T-Rexes on the same line from what I remember. If I'm wrong on that, that's fine. I was just pulling out a random two dinosaurs with each other, but we know that there are dinosaurs that are not as dense as the T-Rex that are found in the same area as the T-Rex. If they died because of a flood, the ones that are less dense would be at the top, and the ones that are more dense would be at the bottom, and that's just not something we generally see within the fossil record. I know you're not a big fan of it, but even if we ignore the idea of a fossil record, you can't deny the fact that we see animals that have lower and higher density on that same level, which shouldn't happen during a flood. The only good argument I could see against that is the one where you could say, well, the ones that were able to fight off the other animals just got to higher land, but then you would have to tell me that ducks are able to outfight T-Rexes. And that's just not something we would yeah, I don't see a duck beating a T-Rex in a fight. Sorry, Donnie, I'm trying to think of the other points that were said. Let me look at my notes real fast. Nope, I don't have anything, unfortunately.
That's fine. Ken, that's 5 minutes of your rebuttal, so that's certainly good.
I'm sorry, Donnie. I swear I'm trying to slow down.
Okay, let me restart the timer, Ken. Thank you for the rebuttals, gentlemen. That concludes opening statements and also rebuttals. So before we get into the discussion, though, as we agreed upon, we can have a few minute break if David and Ken are ready for that.
Yes, I am. I will. As you'll find out at the end of our 2 hours, in my final closing arguments, I've been quite sick during this summer of 2022, and it's changed my taste. So I'm going to go get some hot tea instead of coffee, which is a real change for me. I'll be back. I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Okay, Professor McQueen, take your time and get
Thank
yourself a nice fresh cup of hot tea. There we go. I'll put him backstage. I don't know what I would do without coffee. So let me go over a few announcements. Again, I want to thank the debaters for tonight, Ken and Professor McQueen. The Genesis flood is always an important debate, always an exciting debate to have. So anybody who is interested on either side in a debate on this topic, please do let me know. We at Standing for Truth Ministries, we do have a 2022 Evolution Debate Challenge, but that also does apply to the Genesis flood, since we have our team geologist, David McQueen, who's always up for a debate. And we also have, I guess you could say, visiting debaters at Team Standing for Truth that are always willing to debate the age of the earth and also the Genesis flood. So here, let me go over a couple reminders and announcements during this break period. So this has been another debate marathon week. We kicked off the week with an epic end times debate, me and JD Morin, couple months in the making, and this was fun. Nearly 3.5 hours, very comprehensive debate, pre-trib versus post-trib pre-RAS. So make sure to check that out. That debate definitely helped me in terms of the writing of my current book that is set for a very, very early November release. The cover is basically done, and I should be in nothing but the editing and proofreading phase soon. So you're definitely not going to want to miss out on this book. It will be comprehensive. It will also deal with all types of preterism as well. So it'll be an all-in-one book on eschatology. Last night we had the Great Hell Debate. Praise I Am and Turretin Fan. This one was fun. This one was engaging. Both debaters came in with a lot of knowledge on this topic. So I really enjoyed that one. Karen Weiss, good to see ya and appreciate it. Yes, I'm excited for everybody to check it out. Grayson, good to see ya. Good to see ya. Would love to have you take the Evolution Debate Challenge. I'm sure you would be addicted to debates once you get your first formal debate in there. Okay, so today, of course, day 3, debate 3, the Genesis flood, David McQueen and Ken Rock. Word is, last time I received it, Mark Siegel is, he is still willing to debate Professor David McQueen, possibly in November. So we may actually see that much anticipated debate happen. So again, I do want to thank Ken Rock for being willing to jump into the debate octagon. It takes guts. And if debating was easy, everybody would be doing it. And the reason why everybody's not doing it is because debating is not easy. It takes work, it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes guts. So Ken, thank you so much for doing this. And then tomorrow, debate 4, day 4, a soteriology related debate. James 2, the controversial James 2. What is the best exegesis? CJ Cox and Joshua Gibbs. This one will be tomorrow. So it was originally the 30th, but we're doing it on the 29th, which works out nicely since it's good to have them back to back to back to back. The Evolution Debate Challenge series does continue. First week of October, we've got Kent versus Mike. We've also got Kent versus Ken Rock. And we've got several other debates that we're working on. For example, the return of Jackson Rowe. So Jackson Rowe and Kent will be having another debate. And last two that I want to remind everybody about is actually 3. We have 3 main events at the end of October. So Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, versus Matt Slick. Is the Trinity necessary to explain reality? 2 heavyweights in the debate world. This is going to be huge. This is going to be a huge one. Then we've got our second main event, Mark Reed versus Ken Hovind, Chapter 3. So this one, a lot of people are looking forward to this one, including myself. And we've got Kelly Powers and Turretin Fan, 2 very seasoned debaters. The great Calvinism debate, you could call it. Does John 6 teach the Calvinist doctrine of effectual calling? And I want to give this one a shout out as well. Very knowledgeable individuals here, A.K. Richardson and John Crawford, Free Grace versus Lordship, live on Standing for Truth. And it looks like Professor David McQueen is back in the building with a nice, fresh, hot cup of tea.
Yeah. And my challenge to my newfound friend Ken is, if I'm drinking Earl Grey tea, what science fiction character drinks Earl Grey tea on his spaceship? Let's see how knowledgeable he is about that.
Captain Kirk?
See, you answered. You didn't give him a chance.
I just took a wild guess. He was about
wild guess. You knew the answer. So I'm ready to go again, Brother Ken.
Okay. Ken, Professor McQueen, great job so far. We've concluded the opening statements and rebuttals for this great Genesis flood debate. So we're now moving into the open discussion for about 30 minutes. We've got several points on the table on both sides, so lots to discuss. I'm looking forward to this. We're going to keep it free-flowing and organic, asking each other questions and discussing the topic. So since Professor David...
You're a man of the 21st century. You went to the Google it.
Can you win? Actually, it looks like Born Again RN in the chat.
Jean-Luc Picard. Very good. Very good.
Born Again RN wins. That's Steve Christie, actually. I'll give a shout out. He's coming up. He'll be debating. This is going to be a big one. Protestant versus Catholic. Dr. Robert Sungenis and Steve Christie, the Marian Dogmas debate, first week of October. So been doing a lot of advertising for that one. That one's going to be huge. Okay, gentlemen, the floor is yours. Ken, let's hand it to you for the first question or the first topic you'd like to discuss, since David just ended with actually the other way around this time. So David, you get to pick the first topic and ask the first question. Okay. Ken just ended with his rebuttal. So go ahead, Professor McQueen.
The question that I want to challenge you, Mr. Rock, on is this overall issue of your evolutionary viewpoint. Your evolutionary viewpoint has been summarized by Dr. Gary Parker as involving, let's see if I can bring this down so you can actually read this. I didn't write it very well. Dr. Gary Parker has a poem he's put together. The evolutionary viewpoint focuses on things being old and slow and happening long ago. My viewpoint as a young earth creationist is just the opposite, that the world is young and that things happened fast in the recent past. So having spoken that little proverb there, how would you answer the critique that I've presented, where some of the things like limestone formation that you would think of as happening essentially millions of years ago, very slowly, and the rocks are very old. How would you answer my challenge to you about how, if the chemistry is right in the ocean, you can actually precipitate limestone mud, one type called micrite, in the Bahamas? How would you give a counter argument to this idea that limestones can be created quickly?
See, that's a good point. It actually does throw a wrench into the idea that stuff would have happened slowly. But my biggest problem with this is, and it's one that I generally get into when someone says it could happen this way, or this particular evidence that I have would happen this way, is it doesn't argue that the opposite couldn't be true, if that makes sense. So if you were to sit there and say you can fill a balloon by sucking the air out of a room, that doesn't mean you can't fill the balloon by blowing into the balloon as well.
Yeah,
the opposite doesn't have to be not true.
Yeah, your argument is logical in that sense, but I don't want you to miss my point. The point that I'm trying to argue on is you're a scientist and I'm a scientist. The people that Donny has on range from theologians to scientists. And do you find it interesting, at least I find it interesting, that here you've got this viewpoint of a young Earth that most geologists even believed was true up until about 1700. You've got that viewpoint, and I'm able to explain some things, air going out of the room and going up into the balloon. And you also are able to counter argue that, oh no, the air came in and filled the balloon. Does it strike you as interesting that I have a flood model, I have a model of geology for the Earth, and that as an old Earth evolutionist, you've got one. I think it's exciting that you and I can debate this, but are we missing the point that if you're presenting a scientific argument and I'm presenting a scientific argument, does that not make that, or does it make both points of view legitimate?
It makes it so that both point of views are 100% possible, not 100%. Well, yeah, it makes it so both point of views are possible to happen. So realistically, if you were to sit there and say the balloon got filled up because the air got sucked out of the room, and I'm saying the opposite, I think that because either or can be true, we'd either both have to either find a way to prove what we're trying to say, or it's a dead point basically, and it doesn't go to either of us. So,
okay,
if that makes sense.
Okay, let me move on to another way to critique what you're saying.
Okay.
The viewpoint on standing for truth is that the Bible can be trusted as a historical document. And so when we turn, and I can find it here someplace, when we turn to Genesis 1:1, and it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, I view that as a historical statement. Now, who could have known that? Only God could have communicated that to Adam. And when you go to Genesis chapter 5, and it says, this is the book of the generations of Adam in the day that God created man. In the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day they were created. And so when God talks about the creation of Adam, he's also talking about the creation of Eve. And Adam lived 130 years and gave birth to a son in his own likeness after his image, and he was called Seth. And then if you drop down to 6, and Seth lived 105 years and had a son, he lived after that 807 years and had both sons and daughters. Now, the viewpoint that I'm suggesting is that Old Testament chronology of, I'm sorry, let me say it more clearly. That is not a genealogy, it's a chronology. And let me give you an example from my own life. I was born in 1952. My dad, Edwin McQueen, was born in 1914. My grandfather, McQueen, was born the year after Darwin died. Now think about that. I'm 3 generations from Darwin. And if we go back to my great-grandfather's level in the genealogy, my great-grandfather was contemporary with Charles Darwin. Okay, now let's go to what I want to call a chronology and hear your critique about it. I'm arguing that part in Genesis chapter 5, which is supplemented by data in chapter 10 and so forth, I'm arguing that that's a historical account, but that it's not only a genealogy, it's a chronology. And if you add all those people together that were living 900 years in the years after the flood, and then I'm sorry, not after the flood. If you add those people up that were born before the flood, before Noah, they lived a long time, hundreds of years. After the flood, the lifetimes began to diminish. How do you answer the idea that the Bible is a historical document?
like I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question in one simple
Yeah,
question, if you don't mind?
yeah.
Sorry.
One simple part of it.
No, I mean just one simple question for my mind to just.
No. I'm sorry.
You're good.
I get going fast.
Oh, you're good.
Let me say it this way. In your view, Mr. Rock, is the Bible a reliable historical document?
I'm gonna hate myself for saying this. In the spirit of the debate, I'm gonna have to say that technically we have no reason to believe that it is historical and that we should take it literally. And I'm going to say this right now just because I really hate the fact that I just said that. Donnie knows that I am open to the idea that it can be taken literally and all that. But for the spirit here, I'm going to say that we can't take it literally and that there's no reason for us to say it is a historical document.
And now it's your turn, my friend, to ask me a question.
Let's wait, that happened fast. So I guess I'm going to go to one of the points that I was really big on at the beginning of this.
Yes.
The ones that I'm most comfortable with. So how would you, with the idea of the flood and all that, how would you justify the idea of there being life in the water at all? Like fish, the mammals that are in the water, plant life, sea sponges. How would we see that? Because again, as I pointed out, with the weight, the mixture of waters, how the food pyramid and the food chain would set up, nothing would be able to survive.
Yeah. Okay, let's get the Bible chronology clear.
Okay.
You have the creation of the whole universe 6,000 years ago. The days of Genesis are consecutive, literal 24-hour days. And so by the end of that first week, you have Adam and Eve in a garden with animals and plants. Now, the point is made in the first few chapters of Genesis to say that in the ocean, there were land fish and we believe marine dinosaurs like mosasaurs and so forth. And so when you come up to the time of man's sinfulness, being cast out of the garden and precipitating all the events that led to the great flood, you reach a point where God said, I want to kill every human on earth, and we're going to do that by saving two of each kind of creature that breathes air, including dinosaurs. But see, there were no aquariums on board the ark, so that the heavy aquarium that you and your buddy moved that day, there were no aquaria on board the ark, because every animal, every fish, every brachipod, plesiopods, all the different types of creatures. Here's one of my favorite shark teeth. I think this is called megalodon, if I recall. So there were sharks in the water and so forth, all the way through the time of the flood. So your challenge of how in the world could they have withstood the weight of the water and the change of chemistry? The critique I would give you is, in talking about a food pyramid, from a creationist standpoint, those creatures only had to live for 1 year in the water as the waters rose and then decreased. And so my thinking about that is this. Imagine this rock layer, the black, being salt water, and this zone of Clemson orange here is so this is salt water and this is fresh water. I think the freshwater fish would sense the negative environment of the salt and move up to this layer. Now, be clear, when I speak as a catastrophic flood geologist. I'm talking about this layer extending from Europe all the way to America, if you want to use that as an analogy. And so these are huge areas of fresh and salt water. So that could be one explanation. I reject your suggestion of the food pyramid being any problem at all. Why? Dr. Henry Morris estimated that there were 1 billion people alive at the time of the flood. Now, that's a lot of people. John Wood Morapee, that's his pen name, Jan Petchkis, he estimated 100 million. So let's take the smaller number. 100 million people being swept away and killed by the time the waters rose. My understanding of the kind of gruesome science of taphonomy, of what happens to creatures when they die, is when humans drowned, there's a constriction at their throat and there's some trapped air and they're floating around. And I would suggest that the carnivores, sharks and on down the line, ate the bodies of those humans. What do you think of that?
So, I mean, that definitely would give them food, but it assumes the idea that there would be pockets of fresh water. But that wouldn't happen because the freshwater and saltwater would combine together. So there would be no pockets for any creatures to survive.
Well, let me give you a counter argument to that. This has got the Earl Grey tea in it. The fact that I added tea to water changes the density of this water.
Yeah.
And so if I go over and get a cup of fresh water and mix the two, if I mix it catastrophically, there's still a period of time in which one part of it is predominantly fresh and the other is salty.
Yeah.
And so I'm concerned that your argument about the fresh versus salty is some sort of rescue device or straw dog or straw man, I guess it's called, logically, that you're setting up here.
I mean, it can't be a straw man because it's my argument. And like you said, there'd be a period of time, which I'm not disagreeing that there'd be a period of time where there would be fresh water, but even you're admitting that the water and the tea would mix together.
Yeah, so, it would. Let me ask you another question. How much time do we have left, Donnie, in this sequence?
We have exactly 19 minutes, gentlemen.
Okay, good.
Beautiful.
Let me ask you a hard question.
Okay.
Okay. I have, with my own eyes, seen trilobites in museums. Gary Parker has criticized me that those 5 times that I hiked down the canyon, there really were trilobites in the Tapete sandstone. I just didn't see them. So Dwayne Gish argued that these appear abruptly and fully formed. How come when I've hiked the canyon and gone beneath the Salk sequence of Dr. Tim Clary and gone down to the Precambrian rocks in the base of the canyon, how come I didn't find any transitional organisms for the trilobite?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would have to ask is if you, let's say theoretically, and this is just for the sake of hypothetical, if there were transitional fossils, would you accept one if you saw it?
Oh, yes. And this is a very important point. During the mid-1980s, I was a professor at ICR's graduate school, and we routinely took our students, both undergraduate and graduates, to the canyon. And I would, when we would begin at the top of the canyon, I would say, we're going to go down slowly, and I want you to look because we're looking for data. And 5 different times I hiked down very slowly. A lot of people like Ken Ham, for example, he hiked the canyon with me in '87, and he wanted to get down there. So he took a team, and they quickly went down there. But I went slowly all the way down to the tepites and below. And I would have my students say, now, we're not trying to falsify an agenda. We're not trying to do the wrong thing. We want to be scientists. And so I would have them look. I'm not the best fossil finder around, but some of these students were, and they found nothing. I wonder why. Could it be that all fossils appear abruptly and fully formed, and there's no evolution at all? What do you think?
I mean, that's definitely a possibility. I mean, there's also the possibility that the Grand Canyon is like, did you walk the whole Grand Canyon? That's my first question here.
Oh, no. I walked down maybe 3 or 4 different trails, but that brings me to the counter argument. Have you visited the canyon? Have you hiked down it?
I'm too poor.
You're too poor. Well,
I can't afford
turns out that I understand that argument because I'm now, as a retired geologist, too poor to do it. But the point, all joking on one side, is a very serious point you bring up, and that is the best geologist is the one that has seen the most rocks. But yet, when we look worldwide, and I'll highlight my friend George Bond here, everybody knows that the center of the earth is actually Australia there. I haven't been to Australia yet, but I tell you what I have done, Ken, is that God has given me the opportunity to do field work in South America, in Europe, in Turkey, in Asia. I have spent between 2018 and 2019 a month and a half in Zimbabwe in Africa, the former Africa. So I have actually looked at igneous and metamorphic and sedimentary rocks on all the continents except 2, I guess, 3. Australia I've never been to, Greenland I've never been to, and Antarctica I've never been to. Been to Alaska, though. So it's true that I haven't seen every rock on Earth, but it's also true that as I have gone to all of these places, I've applied my paradigm of, did these rocks form slow, long ago by uniformitarian processes, or did they form not so long ago by catastrophic processes? And I found that the model outlined in the Bible is a better model to explain worldwide geology.
Fair enough. To be fair, I'm not going to sit here and say you have to see every rock in order to make any claims on it, because that would be ridiculous. More the point that I was going to get to is because you asked why trilobites appear abruptly within the
Yes.
I was more going to ask because if you hadn't walked, again, this isn't saying you have to see every rock. Obviously, that'd be ridiculous.
Right.
But if you hadn't seen at least most of the Grand Canyon, you can't. I don't know how you're getting the idea that they just appear abruptly. But
well, yeah, let me answer that because that's a legitimate critique. I have not been all over the earth, but people with a young Earth viewpoint from the 1700s all the way up to now, which would be, over 300 years, they have scattered all over the earth and have seen remarkable things. My favorite example is the Dr. Reverend Professor Adam Sedgwick. He was a professor in the south of England, And each year he would take his class to Wales, and they would look at a red sandstone that had the mineral glauconite in it and trilobites. And so I can see this man going to the board, writing all this down. We're going to go see this. Well, he got tired of that. And so as he taught longer and longer, he said, the area in Wales where these rocks are where the old Cambry tribe, the Celtic tribe of Cambry, once was. So let's call it Cambrian. And then he would show them the fish fossils near Devonshire, near the city of Devon. And he said, well, why don't we call that Devonian? Now, what happened when those students that he taught hit the political environment where the sun never set on the British Empire? These students, whenever they went to America, they went to India. And what do you think, Brother Ken, they call a rock in Tennessee or in Northern Europe if it was red and had trilobites in it and this mineral glauconite, which is green? They said, well, that's just what we were described by Professor Sedgwick. We'll call that Cambrian. And so the early geologists, as they moved around and began to use words like Cambrian, Silurian, Devonian, they were using rocks, they were using names that would actually had been invented by creationists and applied them worldwide. So that would be my explanation of how these people went worldwide. Tens of thousands of geologists have gone worldwide, and yet there's no, in my mind, legitimate transition found for a trilobite below the Canberra-Ordovician contact. So what do you think, Brother Ken?
Sorry, I was just adding to my note real fast. Realistically, I don't have an actual rebuttal to that right away. I didn't actually know about the idea that the Cambrian age and all that were named off of tribes. So that's a fun fact. I'll definitely have to look into that as well.
Yeah, well, not all of them. If you go to Europe, you probably have learned the old rhyme. Carry out some dinner, Miss Penny Pearl, to Johnny Clock, the Queen, to Johnny Clock, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Well, the Triassic rocks of Europe are named that way because they have three basic types, trios, or three different layers. And so some of these are not named for Celtic tribes, but they were named by creation scientists working in the Paris Basin and in Western Germany. Ms. McQueen and I went to Cologne and Aachen, and we actually took a cruise on the Rhine River, and I got to see some of this myself. And it really is the case that you can see where these words come from. But not all of them are Celtic tribes.
Sorry about that.
So it is an interesting fact. How much time, Donnie? I want to take another question from Ken.
So we are at, and you guys are doing a great job. We've got 90 people in the chat. Very engaging debate. I want to thank you both for making this a very easy debate to moderate as I gather questions here. So we are at the 22-minute mark, and so we have exactly 8 minutes, and therefore a couple more questions. Time for a couple more questions. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Ken, you go first, please.
Yeah, and sorry, I'll try to make this next one good and quick for you. So I guess my next question would be, one of the things that I brought up as well, which I wanted to get into, was the idea that we see fossils in places that we shouldn't see them if we were the idea of a flood. So so if a flood like this were to happen, you expect the fossils to obviously separate by density. If something's heavier, obviously it should sink to the bottom of the fossil, to the bottom of the flood. And if something's less dense, obviously it should go to the top. And we don't really see that. I might use the example of T-Rex and the other dinosaurs that are around its period, which shouldn't be within, that should be less dense to them. So what would be your answer to that?
Okay, let me turn around here and get some of the fossils that I brought to talk to you about. This is a gift for our museum here in Louisiana. We call him Boudreaux, the Louisiana alligator. And then here's the trilobite. And then here is a shark tooth. And then finally, here is a model of the clay container that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in. In other words, it's an evidence of human occupation. Well, obviously, Boudreaux here, as I hold his skull, weighs a lot more than this trilobite does. But my counter argument is I'm seeing a modern Louisiana alligator, and if he were to be killed, his body would probably begin to float up in the column of the flood. We would expect him to be able to scamper up on the coast and maybe live for 10 days or 20 days, while the trilobites, the plesiopods, the gastropods, the clams, and the snails would be buried low. And so the issue that I think we should pursue in the questions is the whole issue of, here's the Dead Sea Scrolls inside this thing. How come we don't find in the rock record pottery mixed in with the dinosaurs? How come we don't find evidence of these 100 million humans that we've spoken about? How come we don't find evidence of them somewhere in the rock record? This clay pot is heavier than a lot of gastropods and plesiopods, but let me use your own argument against you. If this had been knocked into the sea, and your argument about the weight of water crushing things, it would have busted this clay pot up. I have taught petroleum geology. I've actually taught it at Virginia State University. And one of the things that our audience needs to realize is that when you drill down in the rock record, a lot of the drill bits, when they get to the bottom, and I'm talking about 10, 20,000 feet, are the diameter of this clay pot. If they were to find a human tooth, or if they were to find a human bone, the people working on the rig wouldn't even know what they were looking at. Why? Because they've been indoctrinated in evolutionary science. And so they're not expecting, if they're drilling in the Silurian or they're drilling a salt dome, they're not expecting to find any human artifact. They're only expecting to find what their training has taught them to be, an evolutionary sequence.
Yeah, that's two things. If you don't, you do know that, and this isn't to be mean, so sorry. Again, if it comes off as mean, obviously I'm not trying to be. There is a difference between weight and density. You know that, right?
Oh, of course, yes, right.
Okay, I need to explain that to
but
you.
If you want to talk about the density, the density in the metric system would be grams per cubic liter or grams per cubic centimeter. In the metric system, I don't even want to talk about the difference between mass and weight. in the English system because this whole business about foot pounds and all that's too confusing. Let me ask you one final question based on what we've done. And this is a question about evolution and probability. Have you played enough poker to know that that's an ace of spades?
Yeah. Well, I haven't played enough poker to know that that's an ace of spades, but I do know that that is an ace of spades.
Spades, okay. I just opened a brand new box of poker cards because I figure my 10 grandchildren are going to grow up in a world where they can't get a real job. I'm teaching them to play poker so they can have some money. No, that's a joke. I wouldn't actually do that. Ms. McQueen wouldn't allow me. But what I do is when I speak about this, look at this. Watch what happens. When I spread the deck, what do you find odd there? They're all spades.
Oh, I thought you were going to go, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
No. And then you go down through it, and here are the hearts. Whoops, wrong way to do it. There are the hearts. And then you keep on going down. There's my wife grew up very conservative. She didn't play poker, so she called these puppy dog feats, but it's actually the ace of clubs. And then you go through that. They're all. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to argue that evolution is a stacked deck, and that when you get all the way down to the bottom of the deck, you find the joker. And I'm arguing that the joke is on the worldwide education system.
Oh, I thought the joke was going to be on me.
Well, as an evolutionist, my friend, it turns out it is.
God, I hate when that happens.
That might be the perfect place to almost like it was planned before this debate. So good job. That was actually 30 minutes and 30 minutes on the dot, 30 minutes and 3 seconds, apparently. So we made it. Great discussion. Fantastic way to end it. You guys were both good sports. And this was a really good debate. Some really good questions and topics discussed. So I do want to thank you both for being very professional and sophisticated in this exciting Genesis flood debate. So what do we have? We got 5-minute concluding statements, and then we have some audience questions before we reach the 2-hour mark. So David McQueen, brother, you've got 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Let me tell Ken and the audience that I've thought a lot about what I was going to say tonight. I've been quite sick during this summer, and actually in mid-July I almost died. And so when you're close to death and then you come through, and by God's grace I'm alive and well now, you think about things differently. And so those of you that have your Bibles can turn to the fairly unlikely book of Amos, and let's look at a couple of passages that I want to emphasize. This is the Henry Morris Study Bible. Dr. Morris was my boss, if you will, starting in around 1980 and then full-time in the mid-80s. So I respect his viewpoint. He's passed away now, but one of the things, he was a mathematician and engineer, and he loved numbers, and he would take Strong's Concordance and count by hand different aspects of things. And it turns out if you turn to Amos 5, verse 22 and 23, verse 14 and 15, it turns out that's the middle 2 verses of the book of Amos. And notice what they say. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. And so the Lord, the God of hosts, shall be with you as you have spoken. Hate the evil, love the good, and establish judgment in the gate, that's in a public forum, that the Lord God of hosts will be gracious until the remnant of Joseph. Now, why would I choose, having such short time, to read those two verses? I think that the evolutionary viewpoint, historically, going back to Darwin's day, leading up to the way that German school children were taught in the 1920s, that evolution is true, that you really can identify by looking at someone that is more evolved and less evolved by their characteristics. In other words, you can determine who is worthy to live and who you don't need. So we can get rid of the people that are old and can't contribute. We can get rid of the people that are Down syndrome. And then it comes down to measuring people's noses and giving an objective reason. Oh, the Jews aren't fully human. They are the cause of all our problems. Why don't we just get through with them? Now, in my study of the Holocaust, here's a remarkable fact many don't know. He almost succeeded. Hitler almost succeeded. 2/3 of all Jews east of Berlin were rounded up in Poland and other places and exterminated in places like Auschwitz. So my concluding thought is that ideas have power and ideas have consequences. And God has spared me this summer through my sicknesses and surgeries to be able to make that comment. Back to you, Donnie.
All right. Thank you very much for that concluding statement, Brother McQueen. Ken Rock, we're going to hand it over to you now for your own 5-minute concluding statement. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, realistically, I don't have too much of a closing statement here. Hold on, let me actually fix the lighting.
Now, as a creationist, I would argue that you are in the dark. Oh, there we go. Now you can see the light.
Okay, sorry about that. So my only thing I can say for conclusions is good first round again. I know McQueen said he's willing to do a few more other debates. We did talk about evolution a lot, which was interesting. I'm definitely down with going for another few rounds of evolution since I have learned a lot with my sessions with Kent, obviously. And again, sorry about the way it's getting set up now.
It's not a problem. I'm looking forward to debating in January. Let's set it up.
I haven't exactly been in the same position as McQueen, so I have been in the hospital, but I am sorry to hear about what happened. I hope you good luck with health, man.
Thank you very much, brother.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for the concluding statements and just the very cordial, respectful, yet technical and engaging debate. You know, these Genesis flood debates are important, and there's just so many fantastic points to discuss in a debate like this. And this was very thorough, very comprehensive. So we got some great questions. What I'll do is I'll put about 20 minutes on the timer, as that will bring us right to the 2-hour mark. And that'll be a good place to wrap up this debate. So, gentlemen, time for some audience questions. As always, with our audience, we have the best audience out there. They send in a ton of questions, and we could literally answer questions for the next 8 hours. So, again, I got the timer. Once the timer goes off, we will wrap it up. So here we go. First question comes in from creationist crybaby. How do we like that, Professor McQueen? So,
That's
creationist
great. Let's see
crybaby.
what they say.
Question for David. Why are fossil organisms found in association with other fossils from coherent ecosystems, not violently transported and mixed with organisms from dissimilar environments?
Okay, well, let me answer that. The idea of violent transport is certainly tied in with a catastrophic view. And I think we can point to different areas on Earth where there is a mixture of terrestrial versus marine creatures, but it's not always the case. And let me use one example for the crybaby to cry about. And we will go back to the example of what we find in coal worldwide. Now, if you, crybaby, look back at some of the presentations of John Mackay in Florida, in Australia, and Joseph Herbert in the UK, you'll find that they have documented photographically and with field work that you can go worldwide, and you do actually find worldwide polystrate fossils. In the Nashville area of Tennessee, I have seen it with my own eyes. You have these layers, and you've got a tree, kind of it's a fossil tree, not a modern tree, but this tree is going through all the different layers. So I'm not going to take the time to get all the different colors of Play-Doh, but as you look at this tree, all the way to the top, it's going through different layers. And so my counter argument to Crybaby's concern is that how come you find this at all? Are you trying to tell me that the old model of allochthonous versus autochthonous coal is worth debating? My colleague, Dr. Steve Austin, in 79, got his PhD from Penn State, and he showed that in the Kentucky number 12 coal, the coal was not autochthonous. In other words, it wasn't growing in a peat bog. It had been transported, and that's what the word allochthonous means, a lot of movement. And in that transport, many of these structures are retained. And so even when you've got a catastrophic transport of some of these environments, you can still see the polystrate tree. But Crybaby, what I want you to think about is how can you explain this within the environment of a worldwide flood? You know, Donnie, I took a nap today and actually feel pretty good. So if you want to push the questions past the 2-hour mark, I'm willing to stay if my opponent has the freedom.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Professor McQueen, for the thorough response, of course. Ken, as you know, here on this channel, we like both debaters to have the opportunity to engage every single question as the debate continues into the question and answer period. So, Ken, if you had any thoughts, anything you wanted to add to that, go ahead.
Nope, absolutely nothing.
Okay. All right. Moving on.
Also, I do have a little bit of extra time if McQueen really wants to.
Yeah, I'd enjoy extending it beyond the 2-hour mark.
All right. Much appreciated, gentlemen. Again, great debate. I do want to encourage the audience, please share this content around. Here on Standing for Truth Ministries, we do strongly believe in critical thinking skills. And so, one way we uphold critical thinking as you know, is by hosting so many awesome debates with so many awesome debaters like Ken and David here today. So Ken, question for you now. We got a nice healthy mix of questions for the both of you. Question comes from Jeff Covell. Thank you so much, Jeff. Always good to see you in the chat. Question for The Rock. How do you explain the Cretaceous chalk layer being located evenly on every continent, containing fossilized sea life? Universal catastrophe seems like the logical assumption. Go ahead.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't actually have an explanation for that. It is something I am going to have to look into for the next one. But yeah, I have no actual explanation.
Well, let me suggest a reference for my opponent to read, and also, if Jeff doesn't have this book on his shelf, he should. Even though I read this book, whoa, the whole thing's falling apart. You got to get a better tripod. Let's see what can be seen here. You can't see anything. I have two different tripods, and I clearly chose the wrong one. Let's see if I can tighten this up. Okay, now let's go back here and see if that'll work. This is actually comical. Let's just put this down and go over to white sheets of paper.
I believe in you.
They'll
You got
work
this.
just as well.
We are going to miss that whiteboard, Professor McQueen.
Well,
lots of good memories, lots
I'm
of
going
good
to take
times.
a break here in a minute, but let me go ahead and give this guy's name. He's a scientist named Agar, and he's written a book called The Nature of the Stratigraphic Record. And Jeff, and if you and Ken need to look up this guy, Agar. Now, you want to get the first edition. Why? The second edition that he's come out with, he's been crawled all over by European evolutionary geologists saying, you said too many things that fit into Noah's flood. You got to change that paragraph. So let's go on.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated. Next question comes in from Grayson Audette. Grayson, thank you for the question. So he asks, can McQueen explain why scientists found Tiktaalik, the famous so-called fishapod, a transitionary fossil between fish and amphibians, exactly where evolution predicted it would be found?
Okay. What I would answer for that is this. I'm not, having looked into this, I am not as convinced as Grayson is that, and I'll make fun of this fossil, I'll call it, isn't there something on the internet called TikTok? I'll call this TikTok fossil. And if you want to take a serious look at why this simply cannot be a transition between fish and amphibians, Dr. John Morris at ICR and my longtime friend, Frank Sherwin, have co-authored a book about fossils. And so if you go to ICR's website, you can buy this fossil book. And Grayson, in the back of the book is an extensive critique of all the transitional organisms that you and I have been taught. And so the transition between fish and amphibians can be found in this book. Now, I would need some additional discussion with you, Grayson, about exactly where the evolutionary model predicted it would be found. I find that hopelessly confusing. No idea what you're talking about there. Back to you, Donnie.
Thank you very much, Professor McQueen. Ken, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, the problem with I'm not gonna say it. You can critique a lot of things. Just because you have a critique for something doesn't necessarily mean that the critique is necessarily true. And I'm assuming that what he means by they were able to predict where it would be, I think that means like obviously they were able to predict the strata of the layer that they expect this to be found when they find it. I think that's what they meant. That's all I have to add.
Okay. David, unless there's any final words on that, we can move to the next.
Yeah, let me do one final word. We need to discuss in the future in great detail the idea of index fossil. Why, when Professor Sedgwick found that trilobite there in Wales, why would that have been so important to his students when they came and found the same trilobite, the same glauconite in a similar unit in East Tennessee? And then when they went to Europe, they found, when they went to Germany and other places where there are Cambrian fossils. Why would that have been so important? Well, it's important because the trilobite is an index fossil. So I think what Grayson means by exactly where the evolutionary predicted it, or what my opponent has said, is that they found the trilobite. Oh, that's Cambrian. They found the TikTok fossil someplace. Oh, that's got to be. You see my logic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grayson, and Ken and David. Thank you for your answers. So, next one comes in from Steve Christie, Born Again RN. This one's a longer question, so he sent it in through email. So I do appreciate it. So I'll break it up. Ken, the question is for you into 2 or 3 sections here on screen for you to see. So we'll work through it together. Question for Ken. Exodus 20:11 equates a literal 7-day week with a literal 7-day creation. Mark 10:6 states God made mankind from the beginning of creation. Same wording as Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Since mankind was created from the beginning of creation when God created the world in 6 days, and the biblical genealogies support a young earth, when would long deposits be possible? Go ahead,
Now,
Ken, take your time.
let me excuse myself while my opponent answers this. I'm going to go get the one tripod I know that does work. I'll be back.
Thank you, David. Take your time.
Do me a favor, put up that second part of that again for me, just so I have it for reference. The first part of the question, again, it assumes that you can prove that the Bible is meant to be taken literally as it is. So again, I'm open to the idea of being convinced that it is, but seeing as the idea that we're in a debate, you would have to now prove that it's meant to be taken literally. If you can't, technically it can be ignored. For the second part, saying that geology supports young Earth. That's would be a claim within the question that's being made, and technically you would have to prove it. I don't think that it necessarily does just support a young Earth, and I think there's plenty of reasons to say that. Technically, we can connect all the continents together and get one super mass, which would disprove it.
Okay, thank you very much there, Ken. As we await Professor David McQueen, I do want to give the audience some reminders and, of course, some announcements. This is day 3, therefore debate 3 of our September debate marathon, which in the summer we had plenty. Ken Rock, always good to have you. You're going to be back here in October debating Kent. Endgame, round 3, the end of an epic trilogy. So we started the week with a debate on eschatology, me and JD Morin. Tons of fun, that one. Almost 3.5 hours. So if you're looking for a comprehensive end times debate, the Great Rapture debate, do check that out. Definitely one of the more thorough debates on that topic out there. We'd like to have more of those as well. Last night we had the Great Hell debate, Praise I Am versus Turretin Fan. And of course, today, the exciting Genesis flood debate, Ken Rock, David McQueen. And tomorrow, we wrap up the week with the great James 2 debate, CJ Cox, Joshua Gibbs. What is the best exegesis? Also, just to tease the audience a little bit, we are in talks of getting CJ Cox and Charles Jennings from the Layman Seminary a debate on a similar topic related to soteriology for probably sometime in November. So be pumped and be excited for that. And I see Professor McQueen is back with a fresh
working whiteboard.
Looking good. There's evolution right there.
Let's go. That's true. With time. Next question, friends.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Next question comes in from.
Wait, McQueen didn't get a chance to answer the last one, though.
David, did you want to add anything to the last question, or
the reason that I was content in leaving Mr. Rock to deal with that is he's already stated earlier that he doesn't really think that the Bible is a historical document. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, he would reject the argument because it was based on a comparison between what is said in Genesis 1, in Exodus, and so forth. So I'll drop it at that point.
That's fine. I just didn't want you to end up feeling like you got cheated out of something like that.
Oh, no, not at all. Let's move on.
Tonight's moderator, he's cheating out Professor McQueen. My own.
Oh, no.
Researcher.
You know that's not what I'm saying.
I know. I'm just kidding. Just having some fun with you. Okay. Well, appreciate it, guys. Great debate so far, and a great audience Q&A. So this one comes in from Doki Doki Bible Club. Doki, thank you so much for the question. And question for Ken. So here we go. How does uniformitarianism explain the subducted tectonic plates that are cold compared to the surrounding material or mantle?
Words are too big. I pass.
Say uniformitarianism 10 times fast. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me take a hit at that. And this is, again, something that I think Ken would enjoy looking into. Uniformitarianism is a very important issue, and it is important for this reason. The basis of evolutionary paleontology and the basis of evolutionary geology is that the present is the key to the past. So if the three of us go to the White Cliffs of Dover and we get lawn chairs and we just sit for a week, drink tea and watch, there's not much that's going to happen. There might be some minor erosions. There may be birds flying by. But the evolutionary geologists in the 1800s and 1700s argued, well, because we know that the Bible is not true, and because we have to explain the White Cliffs of Dover and all of their diatomaceous earth and all that kind of stuff, the present must be the key to the past. So you got very slow erosion of that bunch of cliffs there in Dover. So that must mean that slow erosion has always happened. Okay, so that's what uniformitarian means. Now, the idea of subducted tectonic plates that were cold is something that, Ken, you can find discussed an awful lot if you look up me and George Bond, especially in the last 3 months or so. We've discussed this, but visually, how it ends up with is like this. Let's imagine that this this bottle here is one tectonic plate, and then you've got another one that's coming over and hits it. And what she has pointed out here is that as these two plates move past each other, we have evidence in modern geophysics that this cold bit of rock here is actually down deep. Well, if uniformitarianism was true, then it should have taken a long time, or if there was a long time involved in this, this should be very hot and wouldn't show up cold. Okay, let's go on to the next one.
Thank you, David. And Ken, to be fair, question was for you. So if there was any final words, anything you'd like to add, feel free and go ahead. The
only thing I can think to add now that my little brain has the ability to comprehend what was actually said to me. Sorry about that. It's, from what I can understand, the question that's being asked to me, heat itself transfers at different rates depending on the material it's in. Water tends to help stuff hold its temperature, so that would be my best go at that. I'll look into it.
Yeah, that is worth looking into.
I already got
next question, Donnie.
9 different things to study into, so that's gonna be fun.
All right, not a question, but Jeff Covell, thank you so much. He just wanted to inform Professor McQueen that he found and ordered the first edition of that book on eBay, and he says thank you very much.
Well, that is a valuable, very valuable book. Okay, Creationist Crybaby is back again.
Yes, so, Creationist Crybaby is back for more with a follow-up question or objection, Professor McQueen.
Read the question for me and let me ponder it here.
Okay. So CC asks, David, in the Grand Canyon, why is there evidence of layers formed above sea level, including abundant mud cracks, raindrop prints, ripple marks, and small animal tracks?
Okay, let me answer that with what I have seen with my own eyes. And those are the small animal tracks in the Coconino sandstone. And so let's go to that on the board here now that I finally got a tripod that works. Crybaby, if you actually go to the canyon and walk down one of the trails, I would suggest that you start with what's called the Bright Angel Trail from the south rim down. And when you hike down that trail, you'll find, and again, here's a tree to indicate this is a cross section. You'll find some rocks at the top, and then as you hike down, you will find this white Coconino sandstone. And what's amazing is this thing is about it's about 100 meters thick, or put in the English system, 300 feet thick. And when you look at it, let me get a different color. When you look at it, it is cross-bedded. And what is meant by that is, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can see that. That there are cross beds in it like this. Well, I have observed, if we take this to 3 dimensions, I've observed in the coconino, we can take this now to 3 dimensions, make it a block, and remove this tree business here. And I have seen these footprints in the coconino. And in the mid 80s, one of my graduate students and one of Steve Austin's graduate students was a guy named John Whitmore. Well, he grew up to get a doctorate and is now a professor at Cedarville University. He did quite a study of these, and he found that these creatures were walking up in water, ridges that had been formed underneath water. So my critique is that it's not aeolian, it's not wind blown. Why would I say that? Because if you go to the beach and look at real beaches that are migrating, what you find is not something with knife edge context like this, but rather what you find at a real beach, like on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. When you look at a real beach, and here's a little tree there, you find sand dunes, and you find what's called a littoral zone off the beach, and you go up, and there are other things here. If you can imagine this marching across America to the Grand Canyon, you should expect to find not knife edge contacts like that, but rather undulating contacts. And so I will defer for another night this discussion about ripple marks and so forth. That's a topic for another night. What do you think about that, Ken?
Oh, Ken, I thought you got raptured for a second. You had us worried, but you're back just in time. David, thanks for the answer. Ken, any thoughts on that?
No, I have to pass. I'm sorry about that.
No
problem.
Worries at all. No worries at all.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay, so next question that we have comes in from Mitchell. Mitchell, thank you so much for your question there, brother. He says, if the universe is 13.7 billion years old, shouldn't all matter date at 13.7 billion years old, including the geologic column? I think this is more so directed at you, Ken, because Mitchell is a creationist, but he didn't necessarily specify. So we'll just get both of your input. And why don't we start with you, Ken?
Yeah, I'd like Mr. Rock to begin so that I can go over and get another one of Mrs. McQueen's excellent biscuits and keep me going here.
I wish I lived closer to you, David. I'd have one of those biscuits too. Go ahead there, Ken.
Okay, so 1 second. Let me take in the question fully. So I'm assuming you're asking why, if everything is 13.7 billion years old, why everything doesn't date to that long. It's because this is one of those things where I'd have to give more of a my reasoning for, because I don't have a direct answer on why. But realistically, matter itself, as it changes forms, its creation, the point in which you could detect when it's created would change, because the matter and structure itself would obviously itself be changing as it happens. That's something that happens under a large amount of energy. It's kind of how the I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. When coal itself, if you have a piece of coal, if you were to date it when it was created, you would date it back kind of to a certain date. But if it were to be turned into a diamond, you would date it back to when the diamond was formed, and not the date of when the coal itself was formed, if that makes any sense. So that would be my way to answer that.
Thank you, Ken. David, over to you.
My creationist colleagues on Standing for Truth during the last year have helped me move into the 21st century. And so my friend George sent me a very nice reference. Is it called the James Webb Telescope? Is that what it's called, Donnie?
That's right. Yeah.
The James Webb Telescope has found something from the evolutionary viewpoint that is supposed to be 13.7 billion light years away. Now, if that's the most distant object, then that makes the whole universe 13.7 billion years old. The fact that the universe is that old, in the evolutionary viewpoint, they would say, well, the Earth began to solidify at maybe 5 billion years or so forth, and then you have the primordial slope and the evolution of everything. And so the minerals in the geologic column are what are dated. Since my wife's a redhead, I'll comment that I'd prefer to date redheads, but I have at least been taught how to date rocks. And so it's the minerals that you're dating. And so you would not expect that those minerals to have solidified at almost 14 billion years. You would have expected them to solidify around 5 billion years ago. So, Mitchell, the question you ask, I don't think is right.
Okay. Ken, David, thank you so much. I guess that was kind of a question for the both of you. So, Professor McQueen, we have some good advice in the audience from Michael Hu. He says, don't burn the biscuit. So,
yeah, I just got up and went to the microwave. Thank you for Michael Hu, your comment.
Michael Hu, great advice. We owe you for that. So, next question comes in from Anthony Davidson. If coal is made from dead plant matter and there are vertical petrified trees running through different coal veins, why isn't that petrified tree also coal? Again, not really specifying any specific debater, but why don't we start with you, Professor McQueen, since Ken started with the previous one?
Well, that's Anthony, that's actually a very astute question. Let me think about what I have seen with my own eyes. As I think about that locality near Nashville, there were coal seams all over the place, and that tree, because it's such a good evidence for catastrophic burial and this idea of the coal moving a long distance, creationists at least don't go up hammering on it because it's such a good graphic. So I must admit, with my own eyes, I don't know. I've always assumed that if I were to hit the thing with the rock hammer, it would be coal, but I don't know. And so since I don't fully know how to answer that, I'll move on to a joke. What kind of creature is this, Mr. Rock? Do you see that those are, can you see that they're pterosaurs?
Let's see.
Emotionally, no, I cannot see that.
Not close enough.
There we go. Yeah, I can see it now.
Can you see the pterosaurs? Ken?
Yes. Yeah.
One of those got in our house the other day.
Oh, shit.
And Ms. McQueen asked me, well, how can we not have heard that? And I said, well, as far as the pterosaur is concerned, the P is silent. That's why it was in our bathroom and we couldn't hear it. You get it? The P is silent.
Oh, I get it.
Beautiful.
That's a Boy Scout joke.
I have a feeling Ken will wake up in the middle of the night tonight laughing, and he would have gotten at that moment.
No, I get it. I
Oh,
love
okay.
making fun
I'm
of myself
interested.
all the time.
Okay.
I'm interested in Ken's comment because that critique was very astute. I'll have to contact people like John Mackay and others to see if the polystrates are colified.
Well, David, since you responded with a joke, Ken, not to put you on the spot, but we should have you respond with a joke and make sure it's a funny one as well. I'm
The
just
longer
kidding.
we
That's
go,
okay.
the tolerance for jokes is going to go down. So anything you've got there, Ken.
Does it have to be on subject?
No, of course not.
But it does have to be rated G.
I mean, I'd tell you a joke, but unfortunately, my joke book fell on my head the other day. But don't worry, I only have my shelf to blame.
Okay, let's go to the next question then.
That's good. That's good, Ken. Job well done to the both of you. Okay, so next question comes in from Pickled Grammar. This question is for the professor, the good professor. Would we could have known what the ocean's temperature be, as you were saying? So I guess could have we known the ocean temperature?
Yeah, and the answer to that is, I guess, since people are having trouble seeing, I'll move this closer. The answer to that is something called fluid inclusions. And let me write that down so you can Google it. When I was working for the United States Geological Survey, I was full-time with them from 1977 to 81 in the Washington, D.C. area, D.C. headquarters. The father of fluid inclusions was still alive and well. And he had been studying FLUID inclusions, INCLUSIONS. If you Google this with Professor Roeder's name, what you'll find is that if you make a thin section of a calcite crystal, so here's a rhombohedral calcite crystal, and this distance here is 1 millimeter under the microscope. That's how big it is. When you look at it, and I ran out of ink on my blue, so let's see if this purple will work. When you look at it, there will be zones in it like this. And when you evaluate it, these zones are actually liquids. And they're kind of captured there. So what Roeder rigged up was a way to heat this up. So you put a flame underneath this cross section. I'm sorry, you put a flame underneath this thin section, and you watch when the fluid inclusion becomes a gas. So you watch the transition between a liquid and a vapor. And when you do that, you can actually know that when this solidified, it was at a temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you really can determine this temperature. The theory I'm working on, I'm not finished with it yet, is that many of these calcite crystals solidified during the flood. And so that will give us some indication of the temperature of the flood ocean at the beginning or the end. I hope that makes sense. Back to you, Donnie.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor McQueen. A lot of people in the chat expressing just how happy they are to see the whiteboard is back and well. So that's awesome. Ken, anything you'd like to add?
Gonna be honest with you, completely forgot the question.
Yeah, read it again for Ken's benefit.
Okay, Ken. Question was from Pickled Grammar. Context-wise, I believe it had to do with either Professor McQueen's opening rebuttal or something you gentlemen discussed in the discussion portion. So he's asking, could we have known what the ocean temperature was or be, as you were saying? So it was context, something that Professor McQueen was saying.
Technically, no, we wouldn't be able to just know what that temperature is. We can set up experiments and hypothesize and do all that. In a technical sense, we would not be able to know.
Well, let me give a counter argument to you on that point. It's true that we could do this in the lab, but what I'm arguing is you can go to real mineral deposits in places like Middle Tennessee or the middle of Europe, and you can find these calcite crystals, and you can see the fluid inclusions in it, and you can actually figure out what the temperature was when it cooled. So what I'm arguing is that this is objective scientific evidence, not what many people would call a bench level experiment done in a laboratory. But enough on that. Let's keep on going.
Okay, you're doing great, guys. Great endurance during this debate. This really has been fantastic, and I do think meant to be that Ken fills in here. Ken and David, I appreciate it. So another question from Born Again RN. Thank you so much. Just to the audience in general, I mean, we always have endless, fantastic questions, so it's really helpful.
Yes, it is true.
It keeps these debates engaging when we have an engaged audience. So a question for Ken. Born Again RN, he's coming at you, Ken. Are you ready? So he asks, doesn't the eruption of Mount St. Helens prove multiple layers can be deposited quickly? And why doesn't the geologic column have the same fossils in each layer over the Earth?
Does it prove that they can form quickly? Probably. I see no problem with that. Let's say I accept that as an answer. That doesn't disprove that any could be made slowly. It doesn't disprove that some have been made slowly. So all you got is a neutral stance there, and you don't have any way to prove one way or the other, or that neither could or had happened. For the second part, why doesn't the geological column have fossils in each layer over the ocean? I don't quite understand what he's trying to ask there. Oh, that's over the Earth, not ocean.
Thank you, Ken. Professor McQueen, over to you.
Yeah. Now, one topic when Brother Ken and I get back together in January is we need to talk some about the logic of science, what many people call the philosophy of science. And so his answer to this Born Again RN here is based on a philosophical argument. In other words, he's saying, well, Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980 when Professor McQueen was teaching at George Mason University in Northern Virginia. Perfect teaching tool to have the thing erupt in the middle of me teaching Geology 101. And so you got the eruption, you got the huge explosion, you have got all the events around Mount St. Helens. And so looking into Mount St. Helens this way, here you got this huge volcano, and boom, this part blows up, and throws ash up in the sky, which then is carried by the wind to the east and covered a lot of places. A bunch of people, or at least one man, got killed because he refused to leave the mountain. And so there was a lot of things that were happening. But as you look into this, it turns out that there were flows called pyroclastic flows down this way, and it knocked over a bunch of trees that went into, this is water here. And so all these trees got knocked into this lake, and they all got knocked down here and carried down the mountain. And as these flows came down, they created kind of a scale model, if you will, of the Grand Canyon. Obviously it's like I forget what the number is, like a 1/10 scale model or something. If you Google my colleague, Stephen Austin, he's been writing books he's been writing articles and books since 1990. So he's got 30 years worth of books that you can find online. And so your answer, Ken, is philosophical. You say, okay, well, I'll agree that there are layers there at Mount St. Helens, but so what? What's the big deal? What does it mean? Well, I would counter argue that it shows that over a matter of days and weeks and months, we can have a geologic process that's catastrophic that produces something that in cross section, here's a tree up here, looks kind of like the Grand Canyon. And so I think your philosophy of science is wrong because you don't see the implication of a local catastrophe as proving the possibility of the catastrophic young Earth model.
Thank you very much, David, for that thorough answer. Ken, anything you'd like to add, my good man?
Yeah, I also probably should answer the second part of that, but so no, my answer is basically to say, yes, even if I were to agree that this proves that it can happen quickly, it doesn't necessarily disprove the idea that it can happen slowly. So since this is a debate setting, you would have to prove for your argument, not just disprove mine, in order to get the point as far as this. If we were talking just a flat-out conversation, then yes, I'd probably try and come up with more reasons to one or the other, but yeah.
Well, let me respond to that by saying this. Another day, we need to talk through the philosophy of science, the philosophical side of it. And I think the most helpful way for you and I to do it in the future is to focus on what is called the two-model approach. Let me make a hole in the middle here so I can write this down. One of the men I worked around at ICR was Dr. Bliss, and he was an educator, had been an educator in the Midwest, and he came up with what's called the two-model approach. And this is the idea that in American public schools, it would be helpful to students if they were taught two different models, the evolution model and the creation model. I see my two is not very clear there. So the two-model approach. Now, why is this important in the development of creationism over the last 40 years. The Arkansas creation evolution trial that dealt with a two-model approach in the Arkansas public school system was something I was part of on the perimeter. Dr. Bliss, Bob Gentry, and others were actually in the courtroom. Then we move to the argument in Louisiana over this two-model approach that went all the way to the Supreme Court. You should look into these two things because the two-model approach, I think, philosophically is justifiable. Back to you, Donnie.
All right. Thank you very much. David, we'll give you the final word on that one since the question was for you. And looks like Ken Rock, there is a joke from Born Again RN. It's a dad joke, he says, but he said he wanted to present it to you. He said, did you know Isaiah? So even thousands of years ago, Isaiah had social media, Isaiah 38:14, like a swallow, like a crane, so I Twitter. So apparently he had, not Facebook or YouTube, but Twitter. So thank you, Steve. Very good. Very good. Okay. As we hit the 2.5 hour mark, let's kind of start wrapping it up here with one, maybe two more questions, depending.
Before we do that last question was actually for me.
Oh, it was?
I mean, yeah, we can go on, but.
Oh, you're right. You're right. No, you know what? That's totally my fault. Let me see. Let me pull it back up.
No, that's good. We can move on. I'm okay with how it ended. I just wanted to say something to be a smartass.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. We think that condition is common among evolutionists. So go ahead.
Go ahead, Ken.
I
love this debate because it's been technical, sophisticated, but also lighthearted, cordial, and humorous. So, Ken, go ahead. I do want to be fair, and I want to give you the final word. So go ahead.
No, I really am okay with moving on. I was just being stupid about it.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Super chat comes in from Jungle Jargon, $5. Thank you, JJ, for the panel. I think this is more directed at you, though, Ken. Why are we only losing species? No reprogramming ever happens. What do you got to say to that there, Ken?
Aren't we technically discovering new species every... I don't want to say every day. That sounds crazy. We're discovering new species all the time. So I don't... We're losing, but we're also discovering. So I don't know. With that information as you will.
I'll certainly put my 2 cents in worth there on that.
Do it.
And I've enjoyed the lighthearted side of this, but before I answer that question about speciation, I want to make it clear that even though I've made a big effort to be cordial to Ken, and even though we have had a lot of humor, this creation evolution debate is very important. Why is it important? If we start talking about Genesis and then go up to the New Testament, if we're not careful, we end up calling Jesus a liar who is intended to be our Lord and Savior, because Jesus spoke, and there are many references. Jesus spoke repeatedly about the truth of Adam and Eve and Genesis and so forth. So there are very important issues involved here, and I don't want to be misunderstood. Now let's go back to this. Why are we only losing species? No reprogramming ever happens. Well, because of my illness this summer and things being put off, I haven't had a chance to buy Donnie's book. Can you pull it off the shelf? The most recent book about.
You mean the one I wrote, or
the one that you wrote? The one that you wrote. There it is. This whole special creation book that he wrote, and this is where you talk about the evidence that the definition of a species is not clear in biology. The idea that something in the gene could reprogram a species. Am I summarizing it correctly, Donnie?
Yes, basically, new species or variations can come about in shifts in more genetic diversity to lesser genetic diversity. So new variations are coming about, but it's not through the addition of basically novel information. So
Yeah, good.
that's right. That's right.
Okay. Next one, unless Ken has something to add. Can we take two more and then call it quits?
Absolutely. Absolutely. George Bond, saving the best for last. He just reminded me in the chat, what about mine? And yes, George, he's got a question mixed in here with the many, many questions that have come in. So George Bond, question for Ken. What salt content would be in today's oceans under a deep time
scenario?
Are you asking me how much salt would be in the oceans today? Under a deep... Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, what would be the content in general?
Yeah, no, I figured out after looking at it for a second there. Technically, the only answer I can give is what we would have now if I believe a deep time. I think the answer kind of answers itself. I don't know what the actual percentage of water to ocean it is right now. I don't know.
Well, I'll compliment my colleague George Bond, because what he's driving at is, if you've got mountains over here that have got sodium rich feldspars in it, and you've got rocks over here that have got potassium rich, and then in the atmosphere you have chlorine gas. When you put all these things together and you say that the modern ocean is at least as old as the Jurassic, what George is pointing out is the amount of sodium chloride and potassium chloride should be much, much greater than what we actually measure in modern oceanography. And so George's point is a good critique for you to address, Brother Rock, because the amount of salt in the modern ocean should be orders of magnitude different than what we actually measure it. What do you think of that?
I mean, can you pull up the question one more time? Did I misread that?
Yeah, look at George's comment.
See, what you said, I can run with that and look into that, but I'm trying to figure out how you extrapolated that from this. Because you're saying that he's saying, this other person's saying that there's not enough salt in the water, but he's just asking what I would expect to be in the water.
Mr. Rock, you have to understand that George and I have had hours of discussion before tonight, so I am indeed reading into this what he and I have talked about in the past.
Okay, that's fair. Sorry, because I just didn't get any of that from the question.
Okay, guys, we are going to do one more question. Again, this has been a very thorough debate. I do appreciate it. We're coming up at the 2 hour and 40-minute mark. So great endurance, and I do want to respect the time of the debaters. Sometimes the audience question and answer period is the best time of these debates, because we get to touch on so many good questions and topics. So Sea Science Film Labs, he's got a question for both. So here we go. Great final question, and a question for both. If these layers represent fantastic epochs of time, as most of the evolutionists claim, why are there fossils of modern living forms of life in the chalk cliffs of Dover? Why don't we start with you, Ken, since it is more so directed at you. So go ahead.
Well, technically, the first thing I would have to ask is what you mean by modern living forms, but I'm going to assume that what you mean by that is stuff that we see nowadays. Realistically, a fossil, from what I know and understand, is the place in the ground where the bones are replaced with materials over time. So it wouldn't be impossible to say that we would have modern fossils of modern living things. Why they're in that specific zone? Probably just because they were able to form in that form at some point. I don't have an exact answer for that, but I do plan on looking into the chalk cliffs. It's on my list, so there's that at least.
Go ahead, David, and thank you, Ken.
This will be something we can return to in January, Brother Rock. But if you go to the White Cliffs of Dover in England, they are very, very thick. And I actually want to buy some of this. The chalk there was cut up over the hundreds of years. And this is chalk like you would mark a chalk blackboard with. And so it's really a beautiful, fine chalk. But the point that is being made in that question is the microfossils that are found in the White Cliffs of Dover. You can go into the modern ocean today, and these same microfossils are found in the modern ocean. So here you've got a fossil locality in England and in Texas and in the northern coast of Turkey that have got these microfossils in them, millions of them, and yet you can pull them out, give them to a paleontologist, and he says, oh, yes, that's XYZ. And then you go in the modern ocean and you can find that same microfossil in the Gulf of Mexico, I guess. And so it shows there's been no change over the millions of years. It's a good argument.
All right. Very good. Very good. Gentlemen, question was for both, and we got you both in there in terms of your answers. So here we go. We've now hit roughly the 2 hour and 40-minute mark. That concludes the audience Q&A. Excellent debate. Ken and Professor David McQueen, thank you so much for doing this. The Genesis flood is always an exciting topic, and I think we need more debates specifically on this topic. It's such an important issue. As you were iterating there, Professor McQueen, nothing more important than the origins and ancestry questions. So I want to give you both the opportunity for some final words, final thoughts. Thank you again for doing this. Thank you for your time. Ken, let's start with you. Great debate and some final words.
I don't have a whole lot of final words to actually say. One of the things I was thinking throughout this thing is I'm a good person, and that's, I know you're down for anyone being on the channel to debate. I'd have to talk to him. If you're down to debate this guy, David, guy named Noodle Scales, he's actually really good at debating. I was wondering if that'd be something you'd be interested to if I get him to agree.
Well, I have to pause there because Donny is the one that has been setting up my debates. And so perhaps you should talk to him off camera if you have someone that you think would contribute.
Okay. Sorry, I was just expected to come up with some final words, and that was all I could think of. So
I am a debate agent for many. And yes, Ken, reach out to me. As you know, we don't shy away from debates here on Standing for Truth. So let me know who is interested in a possible debate with David. I'll look into them, vet them a little bit, and then we'll set it up. So I do appreciate that, Ken. Very helpful. And David McQueen, my brother, over to you. Final words.
Final words would be this to both Ken. I appreciate the beginning of our friendship here, and also to the audience, and that is that the point of standing for truth is that everything goes like in a circle back to Jesus. And so let me read from 2 Peter, who talks about in chapter 3 this whole idea of uniformitarianism. And listen to this, Mr. Rock and the rest. This is 2 Peter 3, beginning with verse 1. This is my second epistle, and I want to stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance, that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets and the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior. So the Bible is inspired by the Creator God. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days mockers, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? Talking about Jesus' coming. For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. What? All things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation? That's uniformitarianism, the present's a key to the past. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, so that's a creation, and the earth standing out of water and in the water. There are many minerals that contain water, and so that's what that's referring to. Whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Now, I know a few words of the Greek language, and the word overflowed there is the Greek word cataclysmos. It's not a slow, gradual thing, Mr. Roth, but it's a rapid thing. But here's where the rubber hits the road. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word, are being kept in store unto fire against the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. And so I want to end with a warning to all in the audience that have been using evolutionary thinking as a crutch to hold up the false idea that they should reject the Bible, reject Jesus. Between now and Christmas would be a good time for us all to reread the Gospel of John, to reread the book of Genesis, especially 1 through 12, and then sit back and say, what is going to give me hope in a very difficult political environment and COVID-filled environment? I'll end it on that, Donnie.
As always, Professor David McQueen, excellent final words, final thoughts, and the debate in general, an excellent debate. So we are going to wrap it up here. David, Ken, the audience especially, thank you for tuning in. We had a great live chat the entire time.
With your permission, Donnie, I'm going to move my cursor down, if I can find it, and I'm going to leave the studio.
You're leaving us, David. You're leaving us. Okay.
We'll talk more, Ken.
God bless. Looking forward to round 2, Rock versus McQueen. So with that, Standing for Truth is out, and Standing for Truth is going to get some dinner. So Ken Rock, thank you for doing this. And to David, who is now gone, thank you so much for making this a debate to remember. God bless all.